Hi, everyone. So we are just waiting for Instagram to catch up with us as usual. Let's see what's going on here. Instagram, are we going? Um, Still waiting on. There we go. Okay. So now we're good. Hey, everyone. So welcome to another Thursday Live. I wanted to talk a little bit about the gut microbiome because I think there's a lot of confusion around this topic, right? So I think, why does the confusion start? So let's imagine, first of all, let's talk about what we know. What we know for sure in like 100% of cases is that you watching this, dear viewer, or me sitting here, I am more non-human DNA than I am human DNA, right? I am more my microbiome, my gut microbiome, largely but not exclusively. There's a microbiome of the brain, there's a microbiome of the skin, there's a microbiome of the eye, all these things, right? So there are more non-human cells in this constellation that looks like me and that presents as me and that I talk as if I'm me, right? But there's more non-human stuff than there is human stuff. Point number one. And by the way, that's going to be the case no matter what your diet is, right? Doesn't really matter. Okay, that's point number one that's known. Point number two that is known is that if you take some of those bugs out, they need something to out of where their natural habitat. Their natural habitat is, if we're talking about the gut, the gut, sorry, their natural habitat is my colon, is my lower intestine, right? So if you take those bugs out of my lower intestine, or if you find similar bugs that are and cultivate them in a lab or something, you need something to grow those things on, right? Point number two, right? Now, the substrate, that thing is called substrate. The food for anything, or the food for these kind of bacteria, is called a substrate. Okay, so number one, we're more non-human than human. Number two is, in order to study the non-human stuff, you need some food for them to eat. You need something for them to be living on while you're looking at them under a microscope, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, number three is, there are lots of things you could feed them, but for practical purposes, it just makes a lot of sense to feed those things like basic plant foods, fibers. I mean, that's just what's sort of around, right? And that's also will encourage a certain kind of growth, a certain kind of growth pattern that then you can study, right? So, right, point number three. Point number four is that obviously different species will have different gut microbiome and gut microbiome. And a lot of what we know about humans, we can't really study humans in the lab the way we can study mice or rats in a lab. So a lot of what we know about humans is coming from rats. Point number four. Point number five is, if you have an intervention that works in the lab, whatever that intervention is, even if it's a drug that works in the lab, there's no guarantee that that's going to work in an actual human situation. And that's why the majority of drugs that get tested in a lab, that seem to be effective in a lab, that have a mechanism of action, that you can actually see something is actually happening in the lab, the majority of those drugs do not make it, like when you put it in humans, they just don't do anything, right? They're not effective. Versus placebo, they're less effective than placebo sometimes, right? So what does all this mean? It means that basically we don't understand very much. We don't understand much about the gut microbiome in vivo, meaning in humans. We don't understand much about what constitutes a healthy versus an unhealthy microbiome. A lot of our data is, suggesting what might be a healthy microbiome is based on quote unquote ancestral populations. But I would argue those populations are not at all ancestral. Like, a lot of that work is done on the Hadza, not far from where I am in Southern Africa, over towards the east and Tanzania side. And, those are people, you can talk with them. You should, before you speak on behalf of anyone, you should really try and understand what it is they're saying. And they're telling you that they don't like their government, that they're oppressed, that they're not allowed to hunt in their traditional grounds, that they're not allowed to eat what their ancestors ate, et cetera, et cetera. And in that context, calling that traditional, when they themselves are telling you their diet is not a traditional diet, even for them, that's all kinds of problems, right? Okay, so where does all that leave us? Let's assume, for the sake of argument, it's not an assumption. I think we cannot say anything concrete about what constitutes a healthy microbiome at the population level or even at the individual level, right? Now, here there is some nuance, because I think we can say a lot and we know a lot about what's an unhealthy microbiome, right? Because we see certain symptoms that present with certain, weird, different kinds of fungal blooms. We have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So when bacteria get to where they're not supposed to be, that is clearly unhealthy, right? When there's too many bacteria in general, that's probably unhealthy too, right? So there's all kinds of things that present as unhealthy But again, that's something else we cannot from if we understood completely what an unhealthy microbiome is. I don't think we do. But even if we did, that doesn't mean we can go and extrapolate what a healthy microbiome should be, right? Those are two different questions. Okay. So even if we understand more about what's an unhealthy microbiome than we do what's a healthy one, but even that understanding is not very informative. Okay. So where does all this leave us? When we are looking at, humans have been with the same DNA, and we assume with the same bacterial, co-evolving with the same bacteria and funguses and so on that are in our microbiome. That's been going on for millions of years, right? And we know that the human diet for most of that time has been meat based, almost entirely meat, I would say 70-80% meat, maybe more, right? So given that's the case, what can we say about an appropriate microbiome? An appropriate microbiome is one that approximates the microbiome that we would have on an appropriate human diet, right? I mean, this is just a default hypothesis, a null hypothesis, right? So in other words, all I'm telling you is the foods that humans evolved to eat, it's not just humans who evolved to eat those foods, but the things in our gut also evolved to eat those foods. So if we want healthy things in our gut, we need to have, we need to be eating the food that humans evolved to eat. Let's put it that way, right? Um, Post-Finnistride syndrome, Norway. Hi there. Glad you can join us from Norway. What do you have to say? I had brown rice cakes one day, and the next day I had severe fatigue, brain fog, extreme rash, breakouts, etc. Some grains are crazy inflammatory. This is true, but it is also true that other people could have had those brown rice cakes and been fine, right? So this is where it becomes like really, really personalized. Like, yeah, if you want to know the correct amount of fiber for the whole population, it's 0. But obviously, some people are taking those brown rice cakes and doing okay, right? So, yeah, I'm really hesitant to say anything's unsafe. It's not indicated, right? I mean, this is the word that we are using. I forget his name, Edward Goki, we did an interview with him on this channel. He has a book called Contraindicated, and drawing largely from the work of Bart Kay, as he himself would no doubt admit, right? So fiber is not indicated, but it's not going to have those effects for everybody, but it will have those effects for some people, right? And brown rice fiber, it doesn't suit a lot of people in my experience, right? So some thoughts. Given that we don't know anything or we don't know much, again, like eat the food that suits you, and you will have the microbiome that you need, that you want. The food that will actually sorry, let me put it this way. If you are eating an omnivorous diet, you will have a microbiome that suits an omnivorous person. If you're eating a plant-based diet, you will have the microbiome that suits a plant-based person. I've done that, by the way. It's not a very pleasant microbiome. There's a lot of gaseous formations going on and other things, right? Not advised. Okay. So that's, and if you are like me, eating a hyper carnivorous diet of 80% plus or 70% plus animal foods, then you will have the microbiome that suits a hyper carnivore, which is what humans evolved to be traditionally, right? So more from post-Finnistride syndrome. My gut is destroyed. A normal human should be able to eat grains without experiencing issues on some days. I just need to rebuild my gut back somehow. 100%. And the way that we do that, so there's a whole 4-step program that I teach on how to do that. We're going to be talking more about that course in the days ahead. But the first step is really a pretty strict elimination diet, right? Why do we want to eliminate things? Because if you don't do a full elimination, you can't really tell what's triggering you. And then slowly we introduce foods for those who want to reintroduce. Some people don't want to reintroduce. But if you want to reintroduce, we introduce slowly, we introduce methodically, in a way, week by week. There's a whole program. Again, this is what I teach. So first step, elimination. Second step, reintroduction. Then third step is really about how do we rebuild the connection between the gut and the brain, right? How do we get out of fight or flight? Because a lot of this, it's presenting as gut issues, but some of it is just we're in a sympathetic state. Our nervous system is triggered. So that's step 3. How do we get out of that? And step 4, how do you apply the lessons that you've learned in the past 12 weeks or however long it is in the course? How do you apply those to the rest of your life? So that, I have this motto that, like, once you've worked with me, I really want you to have figured it out on your own. I want to give you the skills to figure it out on your own. And I don't want people, obviously some people renew the program. Some people have to come back multiple times. But my ideal client is one who does the 3-month course and who understands their own body and who doesn't have to come back to me, right? Because they figured it out. So some food for thought. At the end of the day, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. So because anyone who tells you that they know what the microbiome needs or they know what your microbiome needs, I mean, they're just making it up. And I can say this after spending a lot of time with so-called gut health experts. I've had clients who've insisted on going to some other gut health expert, and they come back and say, "Yeah, you were right. They were just making stuff up." What their protocol, it suited me for a period of time, and then it didn't suit me, and they had no answers at the end of the day, and my gut is still messed up. So, some food for thought. Um, Post Finestrade Syndrome Norway is still commenting. That's totally fine. I will respond to those comments later on. Let me know down below what you think of all this, what you think of the gut microbiome, what you think of these codependencies between humans and other organisms. I mean, I find it super fascinating. And I think there's a lot of things that we haven't yet understood, and there's a lot of study yet to be done, and that's exciting. It's a really exciting time to be in the field of gut health. That said, I would never put myself under the care of someone who claims to be an expert in gut health, unless, like me, they're applying sort of ancestral first principles, because I don't think there's enough science to do anything else, right? We know from the ancestral data, from the archaeological data, we know what humans evolved to eat. We have to assume that the microbiome that accompanies that is the appropriate microbiome for humans. And it's not easy, but we have to find ways to get back to those original microbiota and to really improve our gut health through thinking things through, again, from a first principles point of view. Um, yeah, this is interesting. Neurotransmitters. So, hoping there'll be more research down the line on how to eat optimally to produce certain neurotransmitters like dopamine, etc. Again, we got to be careful here, because maybe that's a great idea, but maybe it's not, right? So, when you're talking about the gut brain axis, you got to really start from both sides. You can't just start from the gut side. Yes, the gut side is important, but you've also got to think about other things. What are other tricks we can use to cultivate parasympathetic tone, right? That includes exercise. Exercise is a big one, probably the biggest one. Using different kind of exercises for different conditions. So a lot of people I see are just overtraining. They have a stressful job, or they have a stressful life, and then they're going and doing sprints, and they're doing heavy weight training. I mean, that's just making matters worse, right? They need to be doing other things that are cultivating parasympathetic tone. So exercise is a big thing. Hot exposure, cold exposure, light exposure of certain kind, avoiding lights at certain times of day. There's a million things that we can do, a million interventions we can do. And that's why working with an expert is really the way to go. Because if you work with an expert like me, I know the million interventions, but chances are I've seen someone like you. So I can suggest one or two things that are probably going to work in your case. And I'm almost never wrong. I mean, I'm maybe never like 100% right, like forever. But at that moment in time, when I make that recommendation, that is probably what you need, or that suggestion. If I make two or three suggestions, one of them is probably going to work. Again, just because this is a science and an art, and I've done this long enough that I'm really good. I know the science. I am a trained researcher, so I understand the science very well. But I also am getting really, really good at the art of this, which is, I see someone in front of me and I sort of understand, okay, this is what that person needs at this point in time, because I saw someone similar a while ago. More questions, keep them coming. Post Finestrade syndrome. Um, so bad and good, these are not foods that we use when it comes to food. These are not words that we use when it comes to food, right? So the question is, would you say fiber is still bad even if it comes from a natural food like organic fruit or organic berries? First of all, what does this term mean? Organic just means that it's not grown with pesticides, right? With chemical pesticides. But as we know from studying biochemistry, 99.9% of pesticides found in plants, foods, and fruit and everything are produced by the plant itself. Okay, so this term organic, my brother, who's a biochemist, really, really doesn't like that term. I also am not a big fan of that term. Organic just means carbon based. We're all carbon based. All fruit is carbon based. All berries are carbon based, right? So organic isn't telling me much. And it's not bad or good. It's just not indicated, right? It's just not necessary, right? So if you're having symptoms, again, we would probably take all that stuff out. Maybe not all, but we would find the ones that, in my experience, are the most detrimental, right? So I would say blackberries tend to be worse than blueberries. I mean, this is just purely, I would call it guesswork, but again, I've done this so much that it's more than guesswork. I mean, people seem to do fine with blueberries most of the time. Blackberries, strawberries, not so much. Strawberries also are really heavily sprayed. And whether they're sprayed with quote unquote organic pesticides or synthetic pesticides doesn't matter. It's just a lot of, those are basically antibiotics. So whenever you're having something that's been cultivated, it's been sprayed with antibiotics, whether those are, again, organic pesticides or non-organic pesticides, and you're putting antibiotics into your system. And again, you don't know, those antibiotics are killing all of the bugs. So you don't know are those the bugs that are good for you or bad for you. You don't know. It's just like a nuclear bomb, right? So maybe not as powerful as something like ibuprofen in terms of destroying the gut microbiome, but still that's what it's doing. That's the effect, right? So we would try and, at least for a period of time, take all this stuff out and reintroduce. And by the way, during the period when we take all it out, we also do some other work. We do some emotional work, we do some mental work, we do some work to calm the entire nervous system. Then we can reintroduce and see, okay, and try and keep the nervous system still calm. Now we reintroduce the so-called trigger food. Like for me, it was really dairy. Like I couldn't take any dairy. It was just, I would be on the floor and writhing. Now I have dairy pretty much every day, no effects, right? Because I've healed myself. I figured out the tricks. I allowed myself to heal, and dairy wasn't the problem. The problem was that my gut was a mess, right? And I allowed my gut to heal, and then we did it there, right? So the anti nutrients in fruit are very much there. So you're saying, so there's another comment here. I appreciate all the comments. Fiber from veg are bad because vegetables also come with pesticides. I've talked about pesticides, anti-nutrients, etc. That's true. With fruit, it seems to be very low inflammatory. I think we got to be very careful here, man, because I'm living here in Southern Africa and walking. Sometimes I go for long walks in places where we know that humans were living here 80,000, 100,000 years ago or more. And you will see lots of fruit here, right? But most of that fruit will kill you. Like you'll see lots of berries. Those berries have co-evolved with specific birds and specific animals, right? So yes, when a plant produces a fruit, it does want some animal to take that fruit and go and plant it somewhere. Like it's part of the sexual reproduction strategy of the plant. That is true, but it's not always humans. And sometimes those fruit, I mean, even fruits that I've seen, when I go and visit the indigenous people of this country, the so-called Khoisan people, who I call the Sake people, when we go and visit them, they sometimes have things that I can't have, man. I'm not going to eat those berries. They're going to make me sick. And because I've done it once or twice, and you do get very, very sick. So you have to be very careful with all this stuff. You can't assume that it's not going to trigger your inflammation, especially if you're suffering from something like Finstrid syndrome or whatever it may be. It's a very rare disease that is, lingering effects for years and years and years. You might have to go on a very, very restricted diet, right? Yeah. So those are some thoughts. I see you're still posting, Mr. Finstrid. So we will continue that later on. I have a client who's about to log in, so I will end this live stream now. But thanks, everyone. I mean, let me know down below, what are the thoughts on the microbiome? Like, what are people thinking? What are people doing? I see people eating millets. I see people doing all kinds of things. I mean, if I were to take something for the microbiome, it would probably be pure fatty acids, right? It would be things like butyric acid. It would be maybe omega-3s. I'm a little bit skeptical about the omega-3 stuff. Pure like stearic acid. Stearic acid is a saturated fat that's known to be pretty beneficial for a number of reasons. Like there's a number of supplements I would take, but they would all be fat-based if I was concerned about the microbiome. My own personal microbiome at the moment. Let me know down below, what would you be taking if you were concerned about the microbiome. Thanks, everyone. Leave your comments down below, and I will respond to each and every one of them. And yeah, thanks so much. I'll see you in the next one.